Oh Ferrari, you try so hard to change, but you never do. Almost this entire F1 season has been a disappointment so far. Here are 5 ways Ferrari keeps repeatedly going wrong in 2025. The final lap of the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. Lewis Hamilton is told on the run to the finish line to hand 8th place back to Charles Leclerc. Hamilton slows down from a speed of more than 340 km an hour to less than 190, but it's not enough, and he crosses the line just under half a second ahead of his teammate. It's unclear whether Hamilton was confused about where the finish line is, given it's separate from the start line in Baku, and Leclerc was ahead by the time they got to that one. All we heard on the slowing down lap was Hamilton make an indistinguishable sound just after crossing the line, possibly in recognition of the fact he'd not backed off enough. Obviously, neither driver was too bothered about which order they finished 8th and 9th in, but it's not the first time Ferrari has had difficulty in this area in 2025. Swapping positions for reasons of strategic divergence, or simply to allow a driver with more pace than their teammate to attack a car in front, is fairly commonplace in F1, as is the concept of handing that position back if said attack fails. But it's something Ferrari has struggled to do cleanly since Lewis Hamilton arrived. In China, before both cars were disqualified for separate technical infringements, Hamilton suggested he let Leclerc pass before changing his mind and then being asked by Ferrari to do it anyway. The way Formula 1 management broadcast Ferrari's radio exchange with Hamilton on this so angered team boss Fred Vasseur, he said he would raise it with them, as Vasseur felt it made Hamilton seem like he was being needlessly belligerent. But anyway, that swap of positions, which eventually did happen, was less than smooth, and so was the one that happened in Miami, where both drivers were unhappy with how the pit wall handled things. Ferrari's shilly-shallying in Miami led to Hamilton's infamously sarcastic radio messages, where he suggested Ferrari's engineers have a tea break while they worked out what to do, before asking them whether he should also let the Williams of Carlos Sainz pass after being told to swap positions with Leclerc. In Baku, the problem was more with Hamilton's own misjudgment, for which he later apologised. He said he got the message really late and was zoned in on the car in front of me, so there's also an element of Ferrari's communication perhaps being a little slow, as well as Hamilton being a little too flat-footed in his response. Although Leclerc wasn't all that fussed about finishing 8th on a poor weekend for the team, saying "I really don't mind," it's interesting that he still pointed to rules not being respected in terms of how Ferrari's drivers are supposed to go racing. This is just the latest incident of Leclerc playing nice and ultimately losing out, and Hamilton not doing a great job of complying with the instruction. But it's also yet another example of Ferrari failing to orchestrate its race in the way it intends. What we mean by execution here is basically converting the pace you have in your car into the results it deserves, or not in the case of Ferrari. It's difficult to think of many races where Ferrari has achieved the optimal result, certainly with both cars in 2025. Probably the best example is Austria, where Leclerc and Hamilton finished a comfortable 3rd and 4th behind the dominant McLarens, helped by Kimi Antonelli wiping out Max Verstappen on lap 1. Otherwise, this has been mostly a season characterised by a fundamental lack of performance or missed opportunity. Baku is just the latest example falling into the latter category. Ferrari finished Friday practice 1-2 with a near half a second advantage over the field. That was never likely to translate precisely to qualifying, with other teams naturally picking up their pace, but for one Ferrari to fall in Q2 and the other to end up only 10th on the grid represented a major underachievement. And a crucial one too, because that race was largely defined by grid position. From what the drivers both said about wanting each other's tyre compounds at the crucial moments of qualifying, Hamilton wanting the medium and getting the soft at the end of Q2, Leclerc getting the medium but wanting the soft in Q3, it was clear Ferrari misread the change of conditions from Friday to Saturday and also became confused about which of the C6 and C5 compounds was actually the better tyre for their car. The situation wasn't helped by Leclerc going off in front of Hamilton in Q2, meaning Hamilton's soft tyres had lost peak performance for his crucial lap. But as Hamilton pointed out, there's no point saving sets of what you think is the quicker tyre, in this case the medium, for Q3 if you then don't make it through to Q3. Had he progressed as he should have done, Hamilton felt that Ferrari was good enough to fight for pole. For Leclerc, who did make it to Q3, the problem was the opposite. He felt the soft tyre was working really well in Q1, where he lapped just over a 10th off the pace, while switching to the medium for Q3 meant Ferrari took a backward step because he couldn't get them fired up. Leclerc said he was pushing like crazy, yet was still 7 or 8 tenths off the pace before he buried his car in the wall at turn 15. Pirelli claimed the C5 medium was roughly 2 tenths slower than the C6 soft around Baku, so therein already lies an interesting discrepancy between the pace that should be available from the tyres and what Ferrari figured was actually the case. That said, they weren't alone in thinking the C6 was no good. Verstappen thinks it's generally a terrible compound that doesn't do what it's supposed to and should be binned entirely. Ferrari team boss Fred Vasseur didn't really offer a concrete explanation, other than to suggest Ferrari was a bit caught out by the shift in weather from Friday to Saturday, windier and colder, and perhaps overestimated how easy it would be to fire up the medium tyre for qualifying. Ferrari has worked hard on making its car kinder to the tyres over a race distance, which generally comes at the expense of tyre warm-up. There is almost no doubt Mercedes and Red Bull benefited from Baku being a relatively low degradation event where firing up the tyres in qualifying was absolutely key to defining the weekend. Equally, it's fair to say across the balance of the season, Ferrari has done nowhere near as good a job as McLaren has of utilising any advantage it has in the opposite condition, where managing thermal degradation is key. Otherwise, Ferrari wouldn't be sitting third in the championship with a 337-point disadvantage to McLaren. The medium tyre clearly needed additional laps to get it working specifically in Baku, unless it was scrubbed first, something Vasseur pointed out Williams did with the set Carlos Sainz used to qualify second. So there's an indication Ferrari wasn't operating the tyres in the best way. Williams went on to score a podium, which suggests at least that was possible for Ferrari had they qualified better. Williams simply executed Sainz's weekend to a much higher level than Ferrari did. As Vasseur points out, the car has been quick enough since the summer break to have scored much better results than it has managed across the 3 races in Zandvoort, Monza and Baku, and the fact it hasn't has a lot to do with not executing the crucial track sessions correctly. Leclerc would be among most experts' picks for the top 5 drivers currently racing in F1, and Hamilton, even if he's perhaps not among that group at present while he adapts to life at Ferrari, remains statistically the best F1 driver there's ever been. But neither has been at their best this season. Hamilton's year has generally been very up and down. Creating a championship table from the race's F1 driver rankings by awarding points to each driver based on their individual ranking at each Grand Prix so far shows Hamilton only 14th out of 21 in the standings. Only a few races ago, Hamilton was declaring himself useless and suggesting Ferrari might need to replace him. He's picked up his form since the summer break, pointing to an improved process on his side of the garage. This appears to involve fewer setup experiments through the practice sessions and also trying harder to adapt himself to the specific behaviours of the Ferrari, rather than trying to get it to do things he has greater muscle memory of from his long spell at Mercedes. But he committed a speeding offence in Zandvoort that compromised his next race at Monza, and he's still yet to finish on the podium in a Grand Prix this season. Leclerc has managed to do that 5 times already in 2025, but he's also had some bad weekends compromised by mistakes, like his disastrous British Grand Prix and also Baku, where he was especially furious with himself beyond simply the costly error he made in Q3, a mistake he readily admits, "I shouldn't do." Leclerc's crash compounded a wrong setup direction he took for Baku, which he says lost him the rhythm you need to be quick around such an uncompromising street circuit. He says he unpicked this wrong direction in time for qualifying, but then didn't execute his session correctly. Maybe victory was beyond reach given how fast Red Bull and Verstappen were, but Leclerc should certainly have been aiming to match the second place he took in Azerbaijan in 2024. That he didn't was as much down to him as it was to Ferrari being underwhelming. 12 months ago, Ferrari's Italian Grand Prix victory kick-started a very promising end to 2024, being followed by 2 more wins, a late surge towards McLaren in the Constructors' Championship, and plenty of reasons to dream heading into 2025. But this season has been characterised by an underwhelming base level of car performance that Ferrari has struggled to correct. Ferrari denies that its car is ride height compromised, or that the revised rear suspension it introduced at Spa, following a major floor upgrade a few races earlier in Austria, was designed to address this. But we know from what happened in Hungary, where Leclerc set a surprise pole position but slipped back to 4th in the race, that Ferrari was almost certainly trying to run its car as low as it could to access more performance, then trying to manage the consequent plank wear by raising tyre pressures and adjusting setup parameters at the pit stops. We know on other occasions this season, the Ferrari drivers have been asked to lift off the throttle and coast in high-speed sections, not for the common reason of fuel efficiency, but because doing so will lighten the aerodynamic load, raise the ride height and protect the plank. All the top teams have spoken about focusing on the new rules of 2026 while trying to expend as little resource as possible on their 2025 cars, but such has been the closing up of the competitive order during this final year of the current regulations, no one has been able to back off entirely, and indeed Red Bull's Monza floor update suggests it's still pushing hard in the hope of pressuring McLaren. We know the 2025 Ferrari was completely replaced by the 2026 model in the wind tunnel from early summer, specifically since mid-June, 1 month earlier than originally planned. Development on the 2025 car would have continued later if Ferrari had been in contention for the championship, but because it isn't, there will be no further 2025 performance upgrades developed in the wind tunnel. The performance upgrades that had been scheduled for September have been cancelled, and currently there are no plans to spend any of the remainder of its capped budget on CFD-only developments, which don't require wind tunnel time, of the kind which powered the new floor on the Red Bull. Only track-specific components will be introduced by Ferrari from now to the end of the season, which ostensibly means minor fiddling with wing cords and brake ducts. Ferrari's proper upgrades have anyway not been wholly effective, and it could be the new flexibility limits introduced this season have narrowed the car's setup window even further. The new rear suspension, in conjunction with some brake material changes introduced earlier in 2025, also seems to have made the car more difficult to optimise around the brakes, as well as unsettling the drivers, Hamilton in particular. The level of McLaren's superiority this year has undoubtedly surprised the competition, even though they finished 2024 as constructors' champions. But it's also true to say Ferrari's overall level of performance has been surprisingly underwhelming. Ferrari is currently the only one of the top 4 teams not to have won a race, except for the China Sprint, and there are no clear-cut opportunities among the final 7 events where you'd argue this version of Ferrari is a nailed-on favourite, in the way perhaps Mercedes would be in Vegas. If Ferrari's 2025 Grand Prix win tally stays stuck on 0, that negative record would put this version of Ferrari on a par with truly disastrous iterations like 2014 and 2016, which rank among the worst in this storied team's long and proud F1 history.